introduce our guest too.
Be happy to. Thank you, Tim. I hope each of you can hear me tonight, because I said I don't need a microphone, but I've discovered that as I've aged a day or two, my voice isn't what it used to be. So if you don't hear me well, tell me to speak up. You won't offend me. My wife does all the time. We have honored guests here this evening that I know of. Besides yourselves, and I appreciate all of you coming out this evening. I want to make this an interesting evening for you. Before we get into the program, let me introduce my friend, Andy and Frances Sales. Andy, would you and Frances stand up? While they're standing, Andy is a descendant of his sisters of Meriwether Lewis.
Great.
It's not often that we have the honor of having a descendant in a group meeting like this. We're honored to have you here tonight. Thank you. I'm going to try to entertain you just a little bit, but I'm going to try to teach you a lot of things and remind you of things that are happening in your own backyard. Tim told you that I was vice chair, but to be a vice chair, you have to have a chair of an organization. My chair for the Lewis and Clark Trust, is no less than Stephanie Ambrose Tubbs, the daughter of the late Stephen Ambrose, the writer of Undaunted Courage. I know that you have Undaunted Courage in this library. You may have in your own libraries at home. But I know when I called Saturday morning, they told me there's one copy here. It may be checked out by now. The librarian got so excited about it, she said, I want to read that too. So she may have it her own, or checked out for her own reading. Besides Andy and Frances, I want to thank the Bristol Historical Association for having me here this evening. You've got a prince of a person in Tim Buchanan. Tim has entertained me and given me my driver today. We went back and forth at each other last night from 6 o'clock until 9:30, discussing history of the region, history all up and down the trail here. You've got a dynamite for a president, and please give him a hand for what he does. I don't know what you pay the guy, but it has to be 6 figures at least. Because he's that quality of my person here. I'm challenged. Come on in, come on.
Thank you.
Hey, Tim.
I'm challenged this evening to tell you a story in about 45 minutes to an hour. Give you a chance to ask questions. It transpired over 2 years and 5 months. And I'm going to broad brush some of it, and I'm going to encourage you to do some reading on your own after I leave. I will be back. When, I'm not certain, but I will be back. But my job tonight is to encourage you to do some learning on your own about your own backyard. And that's the theme of the evening. Lewis and Clark in your own backyard. Before we can talk about Lewis and Clark in your backyard, let's just do a quick review of what transpired prior to the exploration of the West, and then we'll get to what happened in your own backyard. The Lewis and Clark story started in Thomas Jefferson's mind. People ask me, where did it start? Right here, Thomas Jefferson's mind. He tried several attempts to get the West explored before he became president. But after becoming president, he had the power of the office and the bully pulpit to make it happen. In early 1803, he took his secretary, Meriwether Lewis, under his wing and said, we're going to do this. They were going to make it a scientific exploration of the West. As you know, during the next few months, the Louisiana territory was purchased and it became ours. So it was not only a scientific mission, we were actually exploring the land that we suddenly owned. Now, most of us here have bought a piece of property, or in my case, I bought too many pieces of property. But you probably had a title search on it, you may have had it surveyed, you knew what you were buying when you went for the close, or at least I hope you did. We need to chat afterwards if you didn't know what you were buying. You need some help. We bought millions of acres and had no idea what we had bought. We didn't even know what the general lines were on it, where the property lines were. But we bought it. It was a whale of a deal. Anytime you can buy an acre of land for less than a nickel, you better jump on it. I don't care how bad it is, jump on it. If you don't like it, I'll refund your 3 cents, and I'll see what I can do with it. Lewis started out preparing for the Lewis and Clark expedition. And Jefferson, frankly, was a micromanager. Very, very detailed instructions on what he wanted done and how to get it done. First of all, Lewis needed a crash course in some sciences and some information that he did not have himself. So during the preparation phase of it, Lewis was sent to Philadelphia to study with some of the learned minds of that day: botany, celestial navigation, medicine, other sciences that Lewis maybe had an understanding of, but not how to do it, not how to take an animal that he killed, dissect it, take it apart, save the skin, save the head, and prepare it for review months or years later in back in the East. So he had to learn those things. I don't know whether there's a taxidermist in the room or not, but that's what he was basically learning, how to prepare those specimens that he took into these. He also had to procure material. He was authorized to go to the Schuylkill Armory in Philadelphia and requisition supplies. He was also authorized to go to Harper's Ferry Armory to requisition supplies from the United States inventory. And they needed men. The third part of it is they needed men. They needed men that they could trust, men that knew how to live on the frontier. They needed men that could kill a white-tailed deer, could kill an elk, could skin it, prepare the meat, cook it, take care of themselves. They needed men that could withstand considerable body fatigue, as Lewis called it, day in and day out. William Clark was asked by Meriwether Lewis to find these men in and around Louisville, Kentucky, the falls of the Ohio. When those three things were accomplished, they were getting started. The preparation part of it, planning, securing the materials, and the manning. If you've read any Lewis and Clark history at all, or if you've seen any movies or anything, you know they took a large keel boat from Pittsburgh down the Ohio River and eventually up the Mississippi to near St. Louis, Camp River to Watt, where they spent the first winter. Now that wasn't an easy first winter. As I look around this room, there are a number of us in here that had a military experience and had basic training. Somebody smile, please. I know you haven't forgotten it. You don't ever forget it once you've been through it. Because some of those young men at Camp River that winter got in trouble. This young man will. They found things to drink they shouldn't have been drinking, and they drank too much of it. They got in scuffles. It's typical of garrison duty for a soldier. No one wants garrison duty. They'd rather be in a fight than be in garrison duty, because that's where trouble takes place. And it did that winter to some degree there. Clark was over at Camp River de Bois in the American Bottom. Kentucky men were there with him, and he was in American territory. Lewis was over in St. Louis talking to the fur traders, the movers and shakers of the community over there about his plans and what he intended to do. and they assured him right away that you cannot go up the Missouri River with 30 men. You need more than that. So they actually hired engagees, the French boatmen, to help take that keel boat up the Missouri River the first year. Now let's get into the exploration phase just for a moment here. And I'm going to step back here and pick up your reading material for tomorrow. If you haven't read Undaunted Courage, don't wait, don't walk, but run to get it. If you like history that's fun to read, it's one of those books at 12:30 you say, I have to go to work tomorrow. But I want to read one more chapter. And at 2:30 your wife says, are you crazy? You've been up all night reading that book. It's that kind of book. Stephen Ambrose writes that way. He made it fun. Stephen Ambrose was a beautiful storyteller. He just died too young. If you watched the Band of Brothers on TV, or if you read Band of Brothers, Stephen Ambrose, pure Stephen Ambrose. If you've read the memoirs of Eisenhower, the Second World War, Stephen Ambrose, you're reading Ambrose. He was a wonderful storyteller. Stephen is a man that could stand and talk to a group like you, or 5 times as large, for an hour, ask questions, and finally say, my throat is parched, I've got to have something to drink. And 300 of us would go to the bar fighting over who bought him the first drink. He'd stand there and talk for another hour and never touch the drink. He loved to talk about Lewis and Clark. And so when you read Undaunted, you're reading somebody that loved the story and he put his heart and passion into it. So this is the story of the exploration of the entire Lewis and Clark, but it's the story of the exploration part of it. Now, I said to Tim last night, and he got a kick out of the comment, the Lewis and Clark exploration was the first reality show without cameras, a hidden crew, and all of those things out there. There were men, they had leaders, there were the men, there was a dog, they had Sacagawea, the Indian young lady that was with them, and a baby. What in the world? I mean, you've got a story there with all these characters, plus all these privates out there that are working their bottoms off to make this reality show happen. There's only one difference. When something goes wrong, you don't pick up the phone or cell phone or whatever and say, Houston, we got a problem. They were on their own. They had to take care of their own meals, their own health needs. They had to figure out where they were. They had to move that keel boat up the Missouri River. And they had tons of equipment on it. If there's anyone in this room who's familiar with a blacksmith shop, they hauled an entire blacksmith setup with them west. They had tons of it. They had tons of lead and powder for their rifles. The Missouri River, I'll ask it this way. How many of you have ever been on or even seen the Missouri River? Hands. Give me a show of hands. It's a tough river, isn't it? It's swift, it's wide, it's muddy most of the time. Hey, and that's today. The Corps of Engineers have taken the trees out of it, they've channelized it, but it's still a difficult river to navigate. Stop just for a second and think about what they were experiencing in 1804, taking a keel boat up this river. They have to pole it, if you know what poling is. They have to either roll it or cordell it with a long rope getting out tied to the front of it. They get out and wade along the bank, dragging that boat up the Missouri River. You've got trees in the river. You've got banks falling in. You've got no place to walk to try to pull this boat up the river. It's a tiring job to go up the river with it. Lewis is out on the bank daily, and he's looking at the flora, fauna, trying to figure out, what all this new stuff is that I'm seeing out there, and recording it. Clark is on the boat, and he's doing he's the map maker, the cartograph expert on the expedition. By the way, Clark is super for a map maker. 4,000 miles out, back, Clark was off by today's standards 40 miles. The man knew what he was doing. He could stand here and tell you how far it was, probably within an inch to the back wall or the next street over there, or the next mountain over there. He did it because he had experience all of his life in the woods, in the fields, surveying and judging distances. Let's talk about some of these people besides what they were doing daily, going up the Missouri River. We had 3 sergeants. We had Ordway, we had Floyd and Gass, because Floyd died, probably of appendicitis. We had Sergeant Price. They've got squads under them. They're supposed to be carrying out their daily activities. They're responsible for them. We also had a man named George Uriard. George Uriard was half French and half Shawnee. Indian mother, French father. He was the most expensive man on the expedition, the highest paid man, $25 a month. He could interpret for the Indians. He could kill, bring meat down, bring meat in when nobody else could. And some of those other boys, the Field brothers, were excellent shots and were excellent hunters. But George Uriard always came home with something for him to eat. He could bring it home when he had it. He could bring the bacon home, his expression, and that's what he did. We also had Clark's slave York. Slavery is an abomination. And I'm not going to paint William Clark better or worse than what he was. He was a man of his time. His family owned slaves. My family owned slaves. I suspect many in this room own slaves. We don't today. But York, here's a man's slave. I'll raise my hand and say that York is my personal hero. Here's a man's slave. He carried on and did all the things he did during the expedition with great dignity. York was the first black man to go across this country. And I'm talking about East Coast and West Coast. The rest of them were hired. They were recruited and hired. They became privates or sergeants in the expedition. York wasn't asked to go. He was told to go. York carried out his duties and his responsibilities with great dignity. We'll come back to York in just a second here. Chicago Wheel. Everybody in this room has had a Chicago Wheel dollar in your pocket. I call it Chicago Wheel. You call it Sacagawea. They call her Bird Woman, Squaw, Janny. She was all the same person in her heart. She was a 12-year-old child when she was captured near the Three Forks of the Missouri River, Jefferson River area up there by the Mandans. She was taken back to the Mandan villages, which are near present-day Bismarck, North Dakota. She was married or bought by Toussaint Charbonneau, her husband, French trader, trapper, interpreter. And at 16, she had a child, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. She was 16 years old. The ladies in this room, the next time you think you're having a difficult moment, can you imagine what a 16-year-old child with a child that she's responsible for carrying across this country? Then you'll think, oh, I guess I don't have any problems. York helped Chicago many times. She needed help, and York was the one that helped her. These people gave a human face to the Lewis and Clark expedition. They truly bonded and became that band of brothers. They knew how each other snored at night. They knew how each other's bad breath was. They knew who needed socks, who needed a new pair of moccasins. They took care of each other. It was a family, a human experience moving across this country. It was truly America's first reality show out there. And it was led by two gentlemen that understood what we call today the military code, the Army code. Mission, men, self. I want to repeat that. Mission, men, and self. Mission was always, remember what we've got these orders, we need to find the mouth of the Columbia River, and that's what drove them forward daily. They didn't move every day, but that was number one in the line. That's what got the job done. Mission, men, and self. If you're a dirty boots Army man like I am, you probably heard those, remember those three words. They've got the job done. I want to go back and talk about Clark just for a second. I already mentioned he was a photographer. I mentioned how accurate he was. Clark's maps are extant today. They exist today. And people doing research today return to William Clark's maps. They showed where the Missouri River was in 1804, 1805, 1806. And the Missouri River, it moves. It has moved as much as two miles either direction. It wanders wherever it wants to go. In 2011, it flooded. The Missouri River didn't look like a river. It looked like a lake. It looked like the Atlantic Ocean in places. You couldn't see across it. It was unbelievable how big that thing was. And Clark recorded where those old channels were out there that we use today. Some of them today are called oxbows. Some of them are called small lakes. But William Clark recorded. And Lewis's collection is available today. Many of the plants and animals that he collected are preserved at the American Philosophical Society. There are some in Kew Gardens in London. We won't get into how they got there, but they're there. But there are plants in Philadelphia today that we know are there, and they have Lewis's signature on them. If that's not enough, I don't know what I can do to prove it, but the provenance is there. We have those plants. They also, from Jefferson's instructions, they had a diplomatic relation with the tribal people they met. In fact, Jefferson went so far as to tell them, we do not want to have a confrontation. Learn from them, learn about them, learn all their customs. In fact, that's one of the longest paragraphs in his several pages of instructions. All the things to learn about the tribal people out there. I have a number of tribal people. Is there anyone in this room tonight that has tribal blood or is a member of a tribe? Is there anybody here?
Chickasaw.
Chickasaw. I want to chat with you later. We got something to talk about. Cherokee. Without the tribal people, this expedition never happened. There were places where they did not know where they were going to be going next. Go up the river, but what are you going to experience up the river? You need to know where you're going. You need a Rand McNally. I don't talk about maps on phones and stuff like that. I don't really understand them. I'd really have that piece of paper in front of me. That's the way I learned to read maps. The tribal people told them where they're going, what they were going to find, what they were going to experience. They also fed them. They got to the Mandans in October of 1804. The Indian chief came to them right after they got there, And basically, what he said is that if we eat this winter, you eat. If we starve, you starve. Hey, it's basically, we're in this together. And the man down that winter shared with them, drew maps of where they were and what they were going to experience going on up the Missouri River. Now, digress just for a second. Prior to 1804, what they experienced going up the Missouri River had already been recorded. Trappers, French, and Spanish had already recorded and named most of the rivers, the points of reference they're going to see. But from Fort Mandan, from Bismarck, North Dakota, west, until they got to Mount Hood, hey, they're in uncharted territory. They're on their own. They're back to Houston, we got a problem? No. They had to figure it out themselves. So the tribal people made this happen. They traded got down to the point they traded all their blue beads away. They traded all their trade goods away. They were taking buttons off their uniforms and trading for food for the tribal people. And tribal people made it a successful expedition. Weather and insects. This reality story. The mosquitoes like to eat them alive. They could put bear grease all over themselves to protect themselves from the mosquitoes, but can you imagine smearing yourself with bear grease when it's 90 degrees and the humidity is about 90%? That's all they had to treat themselves with. They didn't have DEET and all the stuff, the sprays that we can put on today, bug away and all those things. Oh, by the way, did I mention a while ago they had a baby? They had a baby. And they also had a dog. Now, what more human activity and interface can you have with a dog? Many of you have animals and pets in your own. They had a pet with them. Lewis loved seamen so much that on the return journey down on the Columbia River, that dog was stolen. Lewis was infuriated. He told the men, go get the dog and kill the Indian if you have to. I want the dog back. And I'm certain that many of you have the same feeling about your pet. It's a part of the family. So they had an animal with them. So this reality show, it truly was a family affair, and it was a reality show. Living at Fort Clapside. Is there anyone in here in the wintertime that said, I'm sick and tired of rain and fog and rain and sleet and snow. This winter be done. I'm done with you. I don't want any more of you. They had weeks after weeks after weeks of no sunshine. They lived in a rainy, wet condition. The skins that their clothing was made out of this time was rotting off their back. They actually left almost a month earlier than intended to because the elk they had killed further out, they couldn't bring in enough meat. And they were just sick and tired of the winter weather. They're just like you all were last winter, like I was. I've had it this winter. I'm getting out of here. I'm going somewhere where it's not as cold as it is here. They put up with that. 23 September 1806. Dug out canoes, men almost naked, skin clothes falling off their backs, arrived in St. Louis. I've referred to them before in group conversations and meetings as the Lazarus group. They had returned from the dead. Most people have thought, they've been eaten alive, but grizzlies are just swallowed up by the world. Months, if not years before. They return to St. Louis, and Lewis sits down and writes Jefferson a lengthy letter describing that they're back and what they found. Excuse my back for a second. I need another book. That letter, for your own reading, is in the 2-volume edition of the letters of the Lewis and Clark expedition and the related documents of Donald Jackson. It's the Bible, or two-volume Bible, of Lewis and Clark. If it's not in your library, someone buy it for the library and donate it, please. You need it here. We'll get to that in a few minutes. These letters tell where they were and what they did. They put a date on it. Donald Jackson collected. Is there anyone here who's read these before, ever gone through these books? Well, it's here. Someone sends me an email, picks up the phone and calls me and says, Jim, I'm working on a paper and I need to know something right away about what happened here. Just a second. What date are you looking for? I reach around behind me and pull Jackson. And say, just a second, Luke. I cite a source. It's not from my memory. It's from the actual document. And they're in here. They're in these books. If it's not here, someone check tonight, please. See if they have it in the library. If they don't have it, buy it for them. Your children deserve it. You deserve it. It's a great book, great section. And while we're talking about books, we're about to get to your backyard. While Lewis was in Philadelphia, he bought blank books just like this, although this has been filled up now, for them to record what they found, their day-to-day activities. When he returned to St. Louis, 23 September 1806, he had these with him. He had lapses when he did not write. Clark wrote almost every day. Some days Clark would catch up 3 or 4 days at a time from what I call pocket notes or cheat notes or whatever, like I carry a pad of paper and a pencil up here. George Ordway, the first sergeant, he recorded every day. But that's what a first sergeant's supposed to do. Are there any first sergeants here? Right. You kept the records, didn't you? And you darn well better get paid. Nobody got paid if the first sergeant didn't keep records. George, this is what Ordway did. He kept records every day, faithfully. Maybe there were some mosquitoes were eating him up, raining, foggy, nasty. He kept a record of what happened that day. These journals are extant today. They're in American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. If you ever go to Philadelphia, go by APS. I'm almost going to guarantee you'll find at least one in the display case out in the lobby. You don't have to go through all the security and everything to get back to see it, but you can see one back in the back. Before you leave tonight, if you'd like to thumb through this one, feel welcome. You're welcome to do so. But please don't take it. I'm a lover of books, and I'll give most anything away, but there's certain books that I need to keep. I can't talk to another group if I don't have my books with me. So I need them. But take a look at it. 23 September 1806. Lewis writes Jefferson and says, "We're coming home. We're back. It was a success. We've done what you told us to do. We've had these experiences that didn't work out the way we thought they were going to do it, but we're back. And we brought all this material with us, plus all of our journals." And he says it'll be about a month, I'm paraphrasing, before I see you. Well, this is 23 September. They actually didn't leave St. Louis until either 18 or 19 October. So he missed his month. He didn't leave then. But he says in his letter to Jefferson, I want to quote this correctly, so I made a note myself to read from. I'm going to come by the way of Cahokia, just east of St. Louis, over in Illinois. Cahokia Mounds today are there. Vincennes, Louisville. I want you to stay with me, real close. Crab Orchard, Kentucky. He didn't mention Cumberland Gap. He didn't have it. Right now, he's defining a route down the old Wilderness Road in Kentucky. We know where it is. Then he said, I'm going to go by way of Crab Orchard. I'm going to go by way of Abingdon, Stanton, Charlottesville. Now, he didn't mention Bristol or Sapling Grove, but he talked about those towns that he had been in before and you were there. He traveled the old Wilderness Road. That's what they did. When they leave St. Louis, he has with him Clark, York, other members of the expedition. He has with him also a tribal delegation. Now, Lewis is now not traveling as an explorer. He's traveling as a diplomat for the United States. He's escorting a sovereign nation leader to Washington, D.C. to visit with the president. Shahaki, his wife Yellicorn, and their young child, White Painted House, were mandates. They traveled with Lewis all the way, and Lewis was responsible. You've been responsible for guests coming to your home or your town or whatever, and that's exactly what Lewis was doing. When they came through this part of Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, they had a sovereign delegate. They had a leader from an Indian tribe. Great responsibility for Lewis and this group of people. And there was an interpreter that could speak Mandan and translate Shaka back and forth. So we're not talking about just a bunch of boys that had a successful hike across the country. We're talking about diplomatic responsibilities that Lewis has now. Now let's digress there just for a second. When they got to Louisville on 5 November 1806. Now Clark is basically at home. Now Clark, like most of us that had military experience, I like to sit down for a while. I like to rest my feet. I like to have some clothes other than a worn-out military uniform. I'd like to have a good meal. I might want a glass of wine. But he also had something else on his mind. He had a young lady on his mind. And Clark prepared himself for a courting experience. The Fitzhugh and Rose store in Louisville has a record of the clothing and the fabrics that William Clark bought so he could make a presentable appearance to Julia Hancock at the Fencast. He must have outfitted himself very well because when he asked her father for her hand in marriage, George told him, said, I approve of you, but she's a little bit young. Come back next year. Next year he was there, Johnny on the spot, knocking on the door, ringing the bell with roses he's planting. He said, you know, I came back to marry this young lady, and he was successful. They did not travel together because Clark stayed in Louisville, and Clark traveled about a month behind Lewis as they went to Washington. Lewis arrived in Washington with Shahaka just after Christmas, 28 December. Clark got there a month later. Clark wasn't, hey, I can't blame him. All the civil excitement about, you know, successful exploration and all that stuff versus a love affair. I'll take a love affair anytime. You know, I did it 47 years ago over here. I make no bones about it. You know, that's all part of the reality show. You couldn't film it. You can't write the script. And much of this happened in your own backyard. So let's talk about the region. I'm not going to talk just about Bristol or Hamilton. I'm talking about the region. And I made some notes for you. I'm going back in time now just a bit, but I want to come up to the present. The Lewis and Clark expedition almost went out of Tennessee. 20 April 1803, Lewis wrote to Jefferson, which is page 37 of Jackson's book back here. He basically tells him, he says, I've written Dr. Dixon, Nashville, Tennessee, and I've sent him $50 with a request to purchase a large river canoe and find a qualified boat builder, meaning a keel boat builder. I've asked him before and done some research, what happened to that $50? It kind of just, like other government money, disappeared. Lewis and Jefferson's, we believe, we have no reason to think otherwise, they were going to leave Washington, come down the Great Valley Road, right through here, go to Nashville, pick up the canoe, pick up the keel boat, and they were also going to do something else. How many of you know where Fort Southwest Point is? Give me a show of hands. Surely to goodness, somebody. Here's a man back here. Kingston, Tennessee, right here in your own backyard, just the other side of Knoxville. 8 of the men that were recruited came from Fort Southwest Point. 4 of them were not accepted. But we know who those other 4 were. Worthington, Potts, Hugh Hall, and Thomas Proctor Howard went on the expedition. They're in the journals. They came from John Campbell's company at Fort Southwest Point. In addition to those 4 men, when they arrived at Camp River Bob, they had 2 other Tennessee products. And I'm not talking about Jack Daniels. They had 2 Tennessee horses. Well, Tennessee furnished the first 2 horses that they used in the expedition. Now, they had horses many times they used during the expedition, but the first 2 came from Tennessee. So you got bragging rights. You can pound on your chest and say, hey, we provided the first 2 horses for the expedition. Now, I mentioned George Uriart a while ago. They didn't, it's obvious now that when we know now, they did not come down the Valley Road, didn't go across the old historic Cumberland Trail to Nashville, or didn't go down the Tennessee River in any way. But George Uriart was hired at Fort Massac, just, I want to say across from Paducah, Kentucky. It's 2 or 3 miles down from Paducah. That's where Fort Massac was in 1803. They hired George Uriart there. George's first assignment was to go to Fort Southwest Point and pick up those troops that are supposed to have been here and waiting for me now. Now, no disrespect to Andy at all, but his forebear was a military man, and when he wanted something done, he wanted it done yesterday. Not now, but yesterday. And those men weren't there, and I can only imagine how infuriated Lewis was when those men weren't there waiting. And he had to send the new interpreter to Fort Southwest Point to pick those men up. George Uriart made the trip across Kentucky, and I have given Tim some historic trail maps. We can look at the big map over here that fell down a while ago. You can see those historic trail maps of 1804 on these maps. We know just about from following those trail maps the route that George used across the border of Kentucky, across the Cumberland Trail, north of the Cumberland River, to Fort Southwest Point. It took him 41 days over and back to those men. That's about 15 miles a day. Now, I don't know how long George stayed at the fort, whether he stayed there 20 minutes or 2 days or what, but that's a pretty good trip. Any of you want to hike that today and do it 15 miles a day, have at it. Send me a postcard. I'm not going with you, honestly. Now, let's see. And that's 2 of the things in Tennessee we haven't even started. Chickasaw Bluffs. How many of you know where Chickasaw Bluffs is today? Hey, good, good. That's right, Memphis, Tennessee. Lewis was going to go to Washington in 1809 as governor of the Upper Louisiana Territory to settle his yearly accounts with the War Department there. He arrives at Chickasaw Bluffs Hill. He goes across the corner of Mississippi, northwest to southeast to Hohoka, the Chickasaw Nation. There, that's where the Chickasaw headquarters was in 1809, and turns and goes up to Natchez Trace. He arrives at Grinder's Stand and dies. For any of you who ask me my opinion, I don't know. I don't know. There are reasons and there's evidence both ways. So don't even bring it up. I'm going to say this to you though. It's not important after death. It's what we're doing today. What we did before we got to that death moment. Honor Meriwether Lewis for his accomplishments before he died. End of subject. I'll stand here all night and defend that thesis. It's good enough for me. And I've seen some rooms become divided and undone. That's enough. York. There's always been a question, what happened to York? I'm going to read just a bit here for you. 13 September 1832, the Western Journals of Washington Irving. Washington Irving was our first American writer. This is the edition from John McDermott, University of Oklahoma Press, 1944, page 82. William Clark told Washington Irving he freed York sometime before 1832. He gave him 6 horses and a wagon and basically put him in the freight business between Richmond, Kentucky and Nashville, Tennessee. Now, if you've ever had a business experience that didn't work out for you, there's probably several reasons it didn't work out. But can you imagine a freed black man in 1832 trying to compete in a market where there were slaves? The cards are stacked against you in business. You're not going to survive. But York tried. Why did York take his business to Nashville? We believe, some degree of supposition, but reason to believe. York was married. York's wife belonged to another slave owner. The slave owner pulled up from Louisville, Kentucky and moved south. It's believed that that slave owner either moved to Memphis or Nashville. York was simply trying to get back to his wife. If you find another explanation that's better than that, wake me up in the middle of the night, please. Jim Holmberg and I have wrestled with it for years. And Jim is a noted author. There's another book that you need in your library here. I did not check to see if this book is here, but it's Dear Brother of Jim Holmberg. It is an editing of letters that William Clark wrote his older brother, his oldest brother, Jonathan Clark, that were found a few years ago. Those letters are extant today. Jim edited those letters. The annotations the letter may be 3/4 of a page. The annotation may run 3 pages. There are people in your region right here that are noted in Dear Brother. It's a genealogist's dream. Is literally what it is. You need Dear Brother in your library. Now there was another man that I haven't mentioned, John Shields. John Shields was a Renaissance man, quote unquote. He could do it all. And he did it all. He got some of the highest praise from Meriwether Lewis of any member of the expedition. He was a blacksmith and a gunsmith. And he was an artist. An artist with steel and iron. I learned a couple of years ago that there was a powder horn in the East Tennessee Historical Society of Gay Street down in Knoxville. What in the world? I've got to see it. So I was on a trip and swung in and had an appointment with the executive director down there, and she took me to it. And she explained to me, I'm saying, how did this get down here? I know some of the Shields family today, and they've got a very good genealogy, a well-documented genealogy. I said, how did this get here? And she said, a patron has put it on long-term loan to us, and we think eventually it will become ours permanently. I said, well, did it have any documents? I live with documents. I live with primary source material, it's called. Tim and I talked about primary source material last night, rapid fire, back and forth at each other. What can you prove? And she said, it's family oral tradition. The powder horn belonged to John Shields. There's only one part of this. Whoa, wait a minute. The Shields family left Virginia, and they went to Cades Cove. And the cemetery in Cades Cove is full of Shields. Those that had not died moved to Louisville, Kentucky. It's very likely, you heard me say it, very likely. It didn't say it proved, I didn't say I have a provenance. It's very possible that powder horn did belong to John Shields. But it's right here in your own backyard. I want to wrap this up right now before we start questions. This trail, the official Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail, today runs, as I told you, from St. Louis basically to the mouth of Columbia River. Several years ago, before the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial, and starting in 2003, we were discussing it, meeting 3 or 4 of us late one afternoon. You know, wait a minute, this is not just an exploration story. They didn't arrive in St. Louis in a hot air balloon and a puff of smoke with all this equipment and all these men. I've told you where the men and equipment came from, where the planning was done. I said, we need to be telling the complete story of Lewis and Clark. This is a story that belongs to everybody. It doesn't just belong to me or a few historians that sit around, you know, and smoke their pipe and have a cup of coffee and say, boy, isn't that a great story? It belongs to everybody. It belongs to children of all ages, even those that have graying hair like mine. We need to tell a complete story. We started with a program. First, we had to get a bill through Congress asking the Department of Interior and National Park Service to conduct a desirability and feasibility study. We finally got that through Congress in 2008. 2010, they started on this desirability and feasibility study. With all respect to the National Park Service, and I have many very, very fine friends. You know, friends that call me in the middle of the night and say, I need your help, and I say, what do you need? I don't say where you are. You know, do you need me there? You go help. You're the same way. You got people, they call you, you stop what you're doing, you go. I have that kind of friends in the Park Service. But it takes the Park Service forever to get started doing something. And when they get started, it still takes a long time. But that study, I want to measure. They have one last box on that long list of things they have to do. That last thing is to take the draft study and submit it for public opinion. After that time has elapsed, they will send it on from Omaha, Nebraska, where it's being conducted, National Park Service in D.C. D.C. will have to read it, sniff it, feel of it, sign off on it, and send it on to Congress. We're close, but it's not a done deal yet. And I am old enough to know there is nothing that's done deal until a check's been in the bank 3 or 4 days, then you know it's a done deal. Okay? I can cash that check now. We think we're real close. That trail would come through here. Now I'm going to stop and say this. Don't ask me where the footprints are. There's only one place, that I told Annie and I were talking about that, there's only one place that I can take you and assure you, you're walking in their footprints. It's down at Cumberland Gap, and it's a dadgone narrow down there. That's the only place they could have gone over that gap. And it is the old road down there, by the way. So think about it in a corridor of travel. They came up 11W. But 11W has been straightened out, it's been moved a little bit here, it's been wiggled here and wiggled there. But they came up 11W from Bean Station. Came across Cumberland Gap, 25E, 11W up through here, and then went on up 11W and Interstate 81. Thank you, Paula. Paula says, don't just say 81, say Interstate 81, so everybody know what 81 you're talking about. And she's right. We think this is going to happen. It will impact you in a very positive way. We're asking for only two things. The signs, the official Lewis and Clark Trail signs along the route of travel. Where'd I put it? Trail sign. Right over here. The sign right here. We want those trail signs all across the 11 states in the District of Columbia where this completed trail will run, that corridor of travel. The other thing we want, we've asked for, is a continuous orange line all across the country on the official National Park Service map of the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. It's a red line or it's an orange line. It looks orange to me, but my wife says it's red, it's red. We want that line continually across the country. And my wife has heard this, so it's no secret. I actually told the Director of the National Park Service, I said, if you can't afford a barrel of red ink, I'll buy you a barrel of red ink, the first barrel at least, print them on. I think I can go out probably tonight and raise enough money to buy a barrel of red ink. That's the only two things we want. We want you to be able to teach your children in your schools the values of Lewis and Clark. The values of perseverance, shared responsibility, and collective accomplishment. Those three values made Lewis and Clark successful. And I will tell you today that whether you want to be president of the world or the best shoe shiner in the airport in Knoxville, those three things will still make you successful. And that's why we need your help in completing the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. Tomorrow morning, stop what you're doing. Pick up the phone and call Phil Rowe's district office over in Kingsport and say, let's talk for a minute about completion of the Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. We need it here. Because today, Tim took me over to the Netherland End. We're not certain, we haven't found that smoking gun, that document yet that says, yes, William Clark was here, and he had his wife and he signed the register here. And by the way, they had a 9-month-old baby with them. But it is on 11W, or near enough to it. We're comfortable with it. Because, excuse my back again, where did I put it? I've got a document up here in William Clark's handwriting that I transcribed. It says, in November of 1809, he stopped at Mr. Snyder's in Kingsland. We looked around over there today and I said, do you have any registers here where guests would sign the guest register like you signed at a hotel today? No, they're not there. But we spent a great deal of time talking about what they have there and who would have stayed there and so forth. We have definite information that William Clark came to this country because his journals of 1809 reside in the Missouri State Historical Society today at Columbia. I've seen them, I've transcribed them. We know where he was with Julia and young Meriwether Lewis Clark on that trip. They came to this country. Tell your legislators we want this done. We're not asking for money. We don't need money. We just need the trail completed. I thank you for your time. I'm not certain what I have left out that you want to ask questions on, but I will stay until the library closes and try to answer questions for you. Do you have questions? Let's start with this lady right here.
Okay, how many total were on the expedition? How many were lost out of natural causes or killed or deserted? did they just get the dog back?
They got the dog back. We don't know when Seaman died or exactly where, but Seaman came back, we feel fairly certain. There is a point in the journals, they didn't refer to Seaman any longer after that, but we're confident he didn't get stolen. Okay, how many died? Good question. Sergeant Charles Floyd died in Sioux City, Iowa, just a few outside the outskirts of Sioux City today. He probably died of a ruptured appendix. If you read the journals and look at how they treat him, it would kill us today. Bleeding doesn't work, folks, if you don't bleed. It's not good for you. And they treat him with everything that is wrong, but medical science at that time didn't know what to do with it. But there were two other people who died. It's not really thought of. Great question. In 1806, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark were coming back from the Pacific Coast. They divided. They divided Travelers Rest. If you don't divide a command, unless you've got outstanding reasons to do so, but they divided the command. In fact, they divided and redivided. Lewis went up on the Marias River to determine how far north that river went. The reason he went up to see how far north it went, the further the river went, would determine how much land that we own in the Louisiana Purchase. The land, the ownership ran to the headwaters of the river. Unfortunately, what Lewis discovered was the Marias River goes north and then it turns west. On his return from that exploration, little exploration up there, he met some Blackfeet Indians. They were just kids. The conflict of cultures set in. They were going to, the Blackfeet tried to steal their horses early the next morning. We know for a fact that one of them was killed. They shot one. One Indian. Another one, excuse the expression, was gut shot. You take a muzzle-loading rifle and shoot someone in the stomach without intense medical treatment today, they're probably going to die. Another one was shot in the stomach. There is no proof that he died. If you ask me, I'm not a gambling man, but if you ask me to bet on it, I'll put money on the fact he died. And you had another part of that question.
Yeah, were there any deserters?
Yes, Moses Reed deserted. Moses Reed deserted in the vicinity of Council Bluffs, Omaha, Nebraska, out in there. And they went after, two of them deserted, in fact. A man named La Liberty, one of the engagees. Moses Reed was actually signed out. He was a United States Army private. He could have been shot. They went after him, Drew Guard went after him, brought him back. They sent him back from Fort Mandan. But he had very bad duty. He was assigned very difficult duties for a sergeant from that time on when he deserted. Cover all of them? Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, how many went? How many total went?
Let me give you an answer this way. It's somewhat qualified. 32 of the permanent party from Fort Mandan to the mouth of the Columbia River and back. There is some question about exactly how many of those engagees took that keelboat and went up to Fort Mandan the first winter. That's a little bit, we think is about, let's say 40 to 45, but there's some shakiness in that, and I don't want to portray it more than or less than what it was. Yes, sir.
There was mention of an air rifle.
Yes, sir.
And it was presented a number of times, but did we ever know how many they actually had with them?
The question is, there was an air rifle that Lewis took with him. And I'm going to try to pronounce the manufacturer of the Aaron-Goni style air rifle. There was one. Lewis bought it in Philadelphia almost as a a lark. Here's a rifle, a muzzleloading rifle goes off, and you know it's going off. It goes bang, and there's a lot of smoke, and like, this air rifle went off. There's nothing, no sound. But the can flew off the stump, or the mark on the tree was penetrated. The Indians thought this was big magic. They only had one. I believe it had 16 shots, or enough air in it that would fire 16 times. That's pretty good in that day and age. Fire 16 times without reloading. That's pretty good. That's very good.
That's kind of why they made friends with the Indians right away.
Right. If you read Undaunted Courage, you know the story.
I've read the book.
You know the first person who got shot with it then.
No, I don't.
There's a lady near McKeesport, Pennsylvania. A lady. Lewis's first day out in Pittsburgh. Stopped, visited some men, take a little break, and he was showing off his air rifle. One of the other guys and civilians around there wanted to see this fancy rifle that Lewis had, and he mishandled it and accidentally went off and hit a lady forehead here, a little blood. But, oh my gosh, we killed somebody. We hadn't got out of Pennsylvania, out of Pittsburgh city limits yet. Well, knocked her down. She get up a little bleeding on her. She was okay. But that was the first person who got shot with an air rifle. Yes, sir, over here.
What do we know in historical records about what Jefferson ever said or wrote about what he thought about the expedition after it was all over?
Good question. It was successful, but strangely enough, look, he wrote that it was successful. He reported to Congress it was successful. He even talked to Knox about being responsible. His department, you will be responsible for the pay for these people, make certain they get paid and stuff like that. But he never wrote any long reports about their valor, their accomplishment. It kind of just disappeared. But part of it was near the end of his administration. I don't want to say he lost interest, because he didn't lose interest, but they had accomplished what he needed accomplished. And so it wasn't high on the priority list anymore. By the way, this wasn't the only expedition, military expedition, or expedition that was carried out during that period of time. There was at least 3 others that were carried out. The Hunter Dunbar, the Custer's Freeman expedition, and the Pike expedition were all military explorations for that time. I'll go so far as saying my own reading, my own interest along the long expedition, also explored the United States, mapped it, and had a great deal of determining what the lands that we had out there during that entire period of time. Excuse me, I'm about to lose my voice. Jefferson did write the foreword in the journals. And by the way, I haven't even talked about the journals other than they're the APS. The 2-volume version of the Lewis and Clark journals were not published until 1814. Lewis had those journals, the raw data, with him when he died. They were taken to Washington. They wound up in William Clark's hands, and William Clark hired Nicholas Biddle to edit the journals and put them in a readable form out there. So it was 1814 before they were, and Jefferson did write a forward for that, the Biddle edition of the journals out there. Yes, sir.
I was wondering about the approximate date of when we arrived in Denver.
Talking about history in your own backyard can be dangerous. Help me, please.
I want to say it was early December, December 9th.
It was early December. Let's back into that.
And the year?
1806. 1806, I'll go to the Supreme Court. I know for a fact that they were at Cumberland Gap on 23 November 1806. And we'll dig into it up here and find out what it, because there was quite a celebration up there. Yes?
I had read in a book, and it just had a reference and never said anything more about it, about a supposed Spanish expedition that was sent out to capture Lewis and Clark. but I had never seen anything more about it other than just a reference in a book, not even a name of a commander or anything else.
Thank you for the question. My son actually wrote a paper while he was at the Air Force Academy, or as a second-year student at the Air Force Academy, on that very act. The Spanish did try to intercept the Lewis and Clark expedition and prevent them from going further. They were not successful. The Spanish really didn't want anybody in that country, and it had been turned over to the United States. We owned it. There's no question about it. The Spanish still weren't very happy about it at all. But that's true. Yes, that is true.
Did Jefferson give any directives to avoid conflict with the Spanish in the Southwest?
Actually, he did. He did not want conflict. He didn't want conflict with the English. He got a passport from France and England and Spain, but it was still, the Spanish still didn't like it.
Because part of that Marais exploration was an international situation as well as
Right.
the Mexican.
Oh, yeah. That land out there, the Northwest, the states of Idaho and Washington, Oregon, was still feuded over for 50 years. 54-40 or fight. You know? Yeah, you know, hey, we had first, it's called the right of first feet. If you're there first, you got a powerful control. But Brits didn't like that either. And if you read Astoria, you'll find out that we went there, and John Jacob Astor's people went there and built that fur trading fort. And then it got hot for them. They literally sold it to the Brits, and the Brits lost it again to us. We wound up with it the second time. And it was very contested out there for a long time. Are there other questions? I've said yes, right here.
Is there, I've read it and know it courage. It seems like I read something about that Jefferson's home or some kind of an artifact from the journey.
Yes.
What is that? Me and my friend here, we've read that book and we loved it. I can't remember what that artifact was.
Jefferson was sent a number of things from the expedition. Excuse me, I'm going to get my water here, but I'll try to talk to you. If you go back, if you go to Monticello today and go in the entry lobby, there is a collection there. There are not the originals. But during the bicentennial, Cat Emhoff, CEO at that time, Chief CFO, Chief Financial Officer at Monticello, had them recreate a tribal people to display in that entry hall like Jefferson did. And there's elk horns there, there's a bison skin there with a depiction of a battle on it, and there's other things like that they've got on the wall. They came back from an expedition, but yes, they're there. Yes, Gary.
Jim, you mentioned the core discovery originated in the mind of Jefferson. And you and I have talked about this before, how he actually grew up with this idea of Western expansion. His father, Peter Jefferson, I think a lot of folks here would find this interesting, was a member of the Loyal Land Company. Thomas Walker, Dr. Thomas Walker, the surveyor who came through here in the 1740s, early 1750s, had been chosen by the Loyal Land Company to lead an expedition up the Missouri in the 1750s, but the French and Indian War put a stop to all that. And so Walker later becomes Jefferson's guardian, and so he passed that idea of Western expansion along to Jefferson, and it never left us.
Garrett's exactly right. Garrett Jackson and I are friends. We've known each other for a long time, worked together on this. You have a built-in, I'm going to put Garrett on the spot. You have a built-in program with a man that lives in Abbott, right? To further explore and talk about what we started tonight. Twist Garrett's arm to get involved and tell you this story, because it's huge. I started out by saying I had about an hour to tell you a story that transpired over 2 years and 5 months. We've only scratched the surface. Peter Jefferson, Dr. Thomas Walker, all those people that day and age. We need to go back and really look at those histories. and make them part of this Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. Are there other questions out there? Yes?
Would you comment on the route, why they chose such a northern route?
On the exploration phase of it, they were following the Missouri River. And the river was, even though it was difficult, it was the easiest way to move on the river. Also in the Louisiana Purchase, that was a way to determine how far north those rivers drain into.
Attention patrons, the Bristol Public Library will be closing at 8 o'clock. Thank you.
Those rivers that from the north that drained into the Missouri River, Louisiana Purchase land would go that far north. And so if they go around the Missouri River, they can kind of get an idea of where their land goes to. That was the back of the Marias thing. Go up the Marias River and see how far north it went, and that would tell them how far north the Louisiana Purchase land was.
Napoleon was involved in this too.
Yes, yes.
That's a very interesting side story.
Yeah.
But the people in New Orleans didn't know they'd been sold. They thought they were still under Spain until the flag was run up the pole.
You know, if a mosquito won us the Louisiana Territory, if Napoleon's army that was sent to Haiti hadn't been killed by the mosquito, he'd have had a tremendous force there to defend the Louisiana Territory. The mosquito killed all those troops down there, set off the riots down there and everything.
And he was glad to get the money.
And he was glad to get the money and run. He literally, he took the money and ran.
Yeah.
He had no choice. He'd already lost the land. He didn't have an army to defend it anymore, so he took the money and ran, literally.
But he made his brother the king of Spain. So Spain belonged to him too. All the Spanish territory.
The Spanish were the fall guys in the same word.
That's right.
We got another guy right here who can make another program for you. Good. Other questions? Yes.
Sacagawea, she was reunited with her family.
She was.
So what became of that?
Part of that reality show, Sacagawea at 16 takes a baby, her husband, and heads back across Missouri with Lewis and Clark expedition. They're going to use the Mandan stone when you find the Snake Indians in the mountains. They will have horses and know the way to get you to the mountains. When they got there and found the Mandan, the Shoshone chief, you don't write this script in Hollywood. The Mandan chief happened to be Sacagawea's brother. They started a conversation translated through 5 different languages, if you can imagine 5 languages. But when she saw who the chief was, she rushed to him and grabbed him and started sobbing and crying. She thought her entire family was dead. Once there was a bond there, oh my goodness, Lewis and Clark knew they had the horses when they realized it was Sacagawea, and as chief, they were brother sister. You know.
So that helped really put another jump start to your journey.
Kamehameha actually selected a guide to help go from the Shoshone Indians, basically in Salmon, Idaho today, up along the front range of the Rockies there, and then across the Bitterroot Mountains before, and he helped them get there. So he provided a guide to do it. Thank you. Great question.
So she never really came back.
When the question is, did Sacagawea come back? Sacagawea came back to the Mandan villages in 1806 and stayed there. She eventually came to St. Louis. There's 2 stories about her death, but she probably died of some kind of illness at Fort Manuel about 1812. There are pretty good records that that's where she died. There's some oral tradition that she died Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, but it's probably Fort Manuel. Thank you for the question.
My question was just about what you just was talking about. My wife and I found reference to the Ford manual there on the, near the Standing Rock and Cheyenne River reservations. And between North and South Dakota, it was a trading post. And everybody seems to guess 99%. But we also found her grave in the Wind River in Wyoming. Now, what's the difference?
With all respect, documents, primary source material, pretty good, versus oral tradition. I'd have to bet on the documentation.
On the same level, Sitting Bull is buried at Reservation 48, North Dakota. There's also a burial site for Standing Bull, for Sitting Bull on the South Dakota side, below, about 20 miles down the river. Probably he's not very deep.
Yeah, very, very likely. Thank you all for your evening.
Just as a quick reminder, our next program will be October the 6th with Dr. Bill Wade, who will present about the perfect family, the perfect legacy, CB Love Church and his family